So the first vocabulary strategy that we will practice is being able to find the meaning of a word using the text or the context. So let's take a look at an example. So when you are reading and you come across a word that you don't know, for example, it was so frigid outside I had to wear two sweaters and a jacket. So say you're unfamiliar or you don't know the word frigid. So the first thing you should do is try to figure out the meaning of the word using the text. So in this case, using this sentence. We also call this the context. I'll explain in a moment. So if I were reading this sentence, it was so frigid outside, I had to wear two sweaters and a jacket. I don't know what the word frigid means, but I can guess that this word probably means cold because if I had to wear two sweaters and a jacket, I must be cold, so it must be cold outside. So in this case, the word frigid means cold. So this is an example of using the clues in a text to figure out the meaning, to define the meaning of a word. So this is our first vocabulary strategy. Find the meaning using the text or context. So we often call this context. Context is defined as the circumstances or the surroundings or the setting. Your environment, the classroom is is the context, or your home is the context, or the chapter in the book is the context, so the environment. So here we are referring to context as the parts before or after that help to clarify the meaning. So the words, the sentences, the paragraphs before or after that help us to understand the meaning of a word. And it's good to note that some words have different meanings in different contexts. For example, in this context, the word frigid means cold. However, frigid could also refer to a person who is unfriendly or a frigid person. So now in our breakout activities in the Zoom session, students will be looking at these four words: gloaming, gloriole, glossitis, and gloxinias, and reading the sentences, the text or the context, to determine the meaning of the word. So let's take a look at the first one. Even though it's not completely dark, you should turn the headlights of your car on during the gloaming. So you can use the clues. So it looks like here this sentence is actually describing gloaming, even though it's not completely dark. So you should turn on the headlights. So why would I turn on the headlights? It must be close to dark maybe, but not completely dark. Maybe that's what gloaming means. In this one, the angel had a gloriole above her head. I've never heard of the word gloriole, but when I think of an angel, I think of them having this ring or halo around over their head. For example, here's an example of this halo. So maybe that's a gloriole. So we're using the context. With a swollen tongue like that, he must have glossitis. Itis. Well, I've heard that before. Sometimes arthritis or bronchitis. Sounds like a medical condition. And it must have something to do with the tongue because they have a swollen tongue. So maybe something's going on with their tongue. That's what glossitis means. And the last example, Imelda planted 3 gloxinias in a big pot in her garden or her apartment. I have never heard of the word gloxinia before, but it sounds like something you plant in a pot, so I'm thinking it's a flower or maybe a plant. So these are just examples of how you could go about figuring out the meaning of the word using the context. Now these were hard, difficult words that you would not use in everyday English. But I gave them as examples because I wanted to use words that you would be unfamiliar with or likely to be unfamiliar with. So if we look at the definitions, without having to go to a dictionary, we can see gloaming, the period of fading light after sunset but before dark. It's the time of twilight or dusk. gloriole, a halo around someone's head. Glossitis is the inflammation or the swelling of the tongue. Like arthritis is the swelling of our joints, and bronchitis is the swelling of the area within the lungs of those something in the lungs. Tonsillitis is the swelling of our tonsils. So that kind of gave us a clue, that itis. And then the last one, gloxinia, is a popular houseplant with large, colorful, bell-shaped flowers. So that's another example of how you can use the text to determine the meaning using the clues. So when you see an unfamiliar word as you're reading, approach it in this order. What should you do when you stop and you see a word you don't know? Should you immediately go to the dictionary to look it up? And the answer is actually no. The first thing you should do is try to figure out the meaning of the word from the text, like I just did in the examples. And then next, if you can't figure it out from the words around it, then look at the parts of the word, because maybe you recognize parts of the word, or maybe there are sections of the word that you know the meaning of. And we'll talk more about this next week, examining the parts of the word. But let's look at the word frigid, for example. The word frigid means cold. Do you know another word that kind of reminds you of frigid, that maybe means cold? When I see frigid, I think of refrigerator. It has that F-R-I-G in it, refrigerator. And a refrigerator keeps things cool. So there I can make a connection to this word frigid based on my understanding of other words. So I can kind of helps me to define this term. The last step, so if you can't figure it out from the meaning of the text, you've looked at the word and the parts and you still don't know the meaning, and you really need to know the definition because you can't understand that sentence or you can't understand the text without understanding that word, then turn to a dictionary as your last resort. So why should you take this approach? Why should you start by finding meaning, then look at the words, and then finally go to the dictionary? You may be saying, why don't I just quickly look it up on my phone? It's so easy. Well, actually, it slows you down. So by being able to understand a word from the text around it, you're saving yourself time. If you have to stop for every word that you don't know to look it up in a dictionary, it decreases your comprehension because you keep having to stop what you're reading, look up a word, go back to the reading, say, oh, where was I? And then maybe you have to go back and read a few sentences before. So it takes you time and actually decreases your comprehension. It also helps you to improve your vocabulary by seeing these words and figuring it out on your own. It helps you to remember the words and recognize them the next time you see them. And the last thing is by trying to understand the words within the text, it also gives you a sense of when and how that word is used. So here is an activity that I find helpful when I'm trying to figure out the meaning of a word. What I try to do is I try to replace the word with another word or phrases, kind of like the game Mad Libs. You may have heard of it. If you haven't, Google Mad Libs and see what you find. So let's try this now. So here are some sentences, and in the blank section is where there was a word that I didn't know. So I took out that word and I read the sentence again, and then after reading the sentences and the context, I guessed as what would fit into that word. So let's try. Letters have blank power. They have magic. The greatest thing in the world is the alphabet. So if letters are magical, and these are clues, and they're the greatest thing in the world, so letters have power. Letters have a lot of power, is what I would say there. Letters have a lot of power, or they have great power. They're magical, and they're the greatest thing in the world. Okay, so let's try the next one. I wanted to blank a bridge over the river. In the beginning, the villagers did not help. I wanted to blank a bridge over the river. I wanted to build a bridge over the river. I wanted to construct a bridge over the river. That would make sense to me. So now we're going to look here. These were the actual words, which may be unfamiliar to you. So say these were the words that were unfamiliar to me. So I pulled them out and tried to replace them with what I thought would fit. So letters have blank power. Looking at the first one. Now let's see. Letters have immense power. Immense means great. It means a lot of. Just like I said, letters have a lot of power. So I was able to figure out the meaning of the word without looking it up. Let's see. I wanted to build a bridge over the river or construct, like I saw down here. The word was erect. Erect means to build or to construct something. So that's another strategy, another thing you can use, another strategy to help you understand the meaning of a text, of a word, excuse me, without having to look it up in the dictionary. If you see a word, just replace it with, remove it like it was a blank space here and fill it in with what you think would make the most sense in this context. And that's it for our first vocab strategy, using context to find the meaning.